At the hospital, my mother-in-law told every nurse. We were still deciding on names, that Ruby was just temporary, after we'd already signed the birth certificate. I grabbed my phone and started recording everything, because what Janet didn't know was that I'd been documenting disrespectful behavior for months. I had professional experience dealing with people who think they can manipulate situations to get their way. See, Janet had no idea that my job as a senior compliance officer at a Fortune 500 financial firm meant I spent 40 hours a week investigating fraud, documenting misconduct, and building cases that could destroy careers. When someone tries to undermine authority or falsify records, I don't get emotional, I get methodical. And Janet had just crossed into territory that would cost her everything. The name situation started the moment Ruby was born. Janet showed up to the delivery room with a handwritten list of approved names. Victoria, Elizabeth, Catherine, all these stuffy traditional names that sounded like dead royalty. My husband Neil and I had chosen Ruby after my Italian grandmother, who raised me after my parents died. It meant everything to me, but Janet heard the name and actually laughed out loud in front of the medical staff. "You're joking, right?" she said, loud enough for 3 nurses to turn and stare. "Nobody names a baby after a rock. Neil, tell me you're not seriously going to saddle my granddaughter with a stripper name." Neil's face went red, but he stood firm. "Mom, we've already signed the birth certificate. Ruby Mae Turner is her legal name." That's when Janet switched tactics. She patted my hand like I was a confused child and announced to anyone within earshot that hormones make women irrational after birth, that we'd come to our senses once I recovered. For the next 2 days in the hospital, she told every nurse who entered our room that the name situation was temporary. She said we were still considering options, that Ruby was just a placeholder like those generic labels they put on newborn cribs. One nurse actually returned with official forms to update the birth certificate because Janet had been so convincing about us changing our minds. That's when I realized this wasn't just stubborn grandmother behavior. This was systematic manipulation designed to undermine our parental authority. And as someone who'd spent 5 years investigating white-collar misconduct, I recognized the pattern immediately. I made my first strategic decision right there in the hospital room. While Janet was in the cafeteria telling anyone who'd listen about our unfortunate name choice, I started building a case file. Photos of the birth certificate with Ruby's legal name clearly visible. Screenshots of text messages Janet had sent to family members saying we hadn't decided on a name yet. Audio recordings of her telling medical staff that Ruby was temporary. Everything documented with timestamps and witness information. What Janet didn't understand was that my professional background gave me significant advantages she couldn't see. My salary of $127,000 a year meant I had resources most people don't have access to. My work investigating financial fraud had connected me with lawyers, investigators, and court reporters who specialized in documentation crimes. Most importantly, I understood exactly how harassment cases work because I'd built dozens of them for corporate clients. But Janet's manipulation campaign was just getting started. When we brought Ruby home, she'd already been busy. She'd used her spare key to our house and hung a wooden sign on the nursery door that read, "Elizabeth's room," in golden script letters. Neil took it down immediately, but Janet kept bringing replacements. Embroidered blankets with Victoria stitched across them, silver spoons engraved with Catherine, a complete christening outfit with Margaret embroidered on the front. She'd leave these items around our house during visits, tucked in Ruby's crib, hanging in the nursery closet, placed strategically where we'd find them. It was psychological warfare designed to make us question our choice and gradually accept her preferred names. But what made it truly insidious was how she deployed it across our entire family network. Janet initiated what I can only describe as a systematic disinformation campaign. She told Neil's aunt we'd named the baby Rose, told his cousins it was Catherine, told his elderly grandfather she was named Dolores after his late wife. Each family member got a different name, creating this web of confusion where nobody knew what to call our daughter at family gatherings. People would look at us strangely when we said Ruby, like we were the ones being difficult. Neil's cousin actually pulled him aside at a barbecue and asked why we kept changing the baby's name. Their mother had heard 3 different versions from Janet. The psychological impact was exactly what Janet intended. Make everyone doubt our competence as parents and position herself as the stable, reasonable grandmother trying to help us figure things out. That's when I realized Janet had seriously underestimated who she was dealing with. My job investigating corporate misconduct had taught me that documentation defeats manipulation every single time. So I started building a comprehensive case file that would expose exactly what Janet was doing and give us legal leverage to stop it. I created a spreadsheet tracking every lie Janet told and to whom. Rose to Aunt Patricia on March 15th. Catherine to Cousin Mike on March 18th. Dolores to Grandfather Tony on March 22nd. Each entry included witnesses, timestamps, and corroborating evidence like text messages or social media posts. Within 3 weeks, I had documented 14 separate instances of Janet using false names for Ruby. But Janet's next move showed she was escalating beyond family manipulation into potential criminal territory. She'd been asking about Ruby's pediatric appointments, claiming she wanted to be involved as a loving grandmother. I thought it was sweet and gave her the schedule. 2 days later, our pediatrician's office called to confirm a name change request. Janet had called pretending to be me and tried to have Ruby's medical records updated to show Elizabeth Janet Turner instead of Ruby Mae Turner. The receptionist was calling to verify because the voice on the phone hadn't sounded quite right. When I explained that no one was authorized to make changes to my daughter's records except Neil and myself, the receptionist immediately flagged our account for security. This was identity fraud. Not family drama or grandmother overreach, but actual criminal behavior that could result in felony charges. As someone who'd investigated similar cases for corporate clients, I knew Janet had just crossed a line that could destroy her life if she continued down this path. I confronted Janet that evening when she came for her weekly visit. She was sitting in our living room holding Ruby, calling her sweet girl as usual. She refused to use her actual name even in our own home. Janet, why did you call Ruby's pediatrician and try to change her medical records? She didn't even try to deny it. Someone has to protect this child from a lifetime of embarrassment. Strippers have names like Ruby. Respectable women are named Elizabeth. The casualness of her admission was stunning. She genuinely believed she had the right to commit fraud to override our parenting decisions. But what really confirmed her complete lack of boundaries was what happened next. Janet started a secret group chat with Neil's entire extended family, titled Elizabeth's First Christmas Planning Committee. She sent matching pajama orders with Elizabeth embroidered across them, made dinner reservations for 15 people under the name Elizabeth Turner's Family Celebration, created a gift registry at 3 different stores listing Elizabeth Victoria Turner as the recipient. Neil's sister, Bianca, finally forwarded me screenshots of the group chat because she was confused about whether we'd officially changed Ruby's name. The messages showed Janet had been planning this fake identity celebration for weeks. She was coordinating with relatives to purchase gifts, book venues, and organize events for a child who didn't exist. But the Facebook incident was what convinced me Janet needed professional intervention to stop her behavior. She'd been unusually quiet for 2 weeks, so I thought maybe she'd finally accepted reality. I posted photos from Ruby's 4-month milestone shoot, just innocent pictures of her in a little dress my mother had sent from Italy. Within an hour, Janet had shared every single photo to her own timeline, but she'd edited all my captions. Where I'd written, Ruby's getting so big, she'd changed it to Elizabeth Victoria Turner, 4 months of perfection. She tagged hundreds of her friends, our pediatrician's office, Neil's workplace, even my employer. She was announcing Elizabeth's official portrait session like it was some kind of coming-out celebration, but she didn't stop at sharing stolen photos with false information. Janet created an entirely new Facebook page called Elizabeth Victoria Turner, our precious princess, and uploaded hundreds of photos of Ruby. These were photos she'd taken during visits or stolen from my social media. She posted daily updates about Elizabeth's schedule, favorite toys, sleeping patterns, all using information about Ruby she'd gathered by eavesdropping on our conversations. The fake page included a birth announcement posted 4 months late with completely wrong information. Wrong name, wrong birth weight, because Janet insisted Ruby had been smaller than she actually was. Wrong birth date, because she preferred Elizabeth's birthday to be in spring instead of winter. She even photoshopped a birth certificate showing Elizabeth Victoria Turner and shared it as proof that we'd finally fixed our mistake. Neil's phone started exploding with congratulations messages about officially naming our daughter. His boss's wife sent a silver picture frame engraved with Elizabeth's first year. His uncle mailed savings bonds made out to Elizabeth Turner. Everyone thought we'd been calling her the wrong name for months and had finally made it official through the court system. Neil called his mother immediately and demanded she take down the fake content. She refused, claiming social media was her personal space to share her granddaughter however she wanted. She said we couldn't control her expression of grandmotherly love. While they argued, I took my first decisive legal action. I reported every stolen photo as unauthorized use of minor's image. Then I commented on each post with Ruby's correct legal name and warned that anyone sending gifts to Elizabeth Turner would be wasting money since that person didn't exist. Within hours, Facebook had removed the fake page entirely. Several family members were asking Janet why she'd been lying about our daughter's identity for months. Janet called that night, screaming that I'd destroyed her reputation and turned her family against her. Neil took the phone and delivered what I consider the defining moment of this entire situation. Mom, until you can say Ruby's name out loud and respect that she's our daughter, not yours, you won't see her again. But Janet's response revealed she was more dangerous than we'd realized. The next morning, I was feeding Ruby when I heard tires screeching in our driveway. Janet's car door slammed hard enough that the sound echoed through our quiet neighborhood. I put Ruby in her bouncer and went to the window to see Janet marching toward our front door. Her face was red and her hands were clenched into fists. She started pounding on the door and screaming that I'd ruined her reputation. She yelled that I was isolating her from her granddaughter, that family helps family, and I was destroying everything. The neighbors came out to see what was happening, but Janet didn't care. She kept yelling that I was a controlling, manipulative woman who'd brainwashed her son. Neil opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him so Ruby couldn't hear the screaming. I watched through the window as Janet gestured wildly, pointing at the house and at me. When Neil remained calm with his arms crossed, she became more agitated. Then I heard him say clearly that he'd call the police if she didn't leave immediately. Janet's mouth fell open like she couldn't believe her own son would threaten her with law enforcement. She said something else that made Neil pull out his phone and start dialing. Only then did Janet retreat to her car, where she sat staring at our house for several minutes before finally driving away. But what Janet had done while we were dealing with her public meltdown was truly shocking. She'd sent a mass email to Neil's entire family with the subject line, "Urgent Family Matter." She was claiming we were suffering from severe postpartum mental health issues. The email described me as experiencing postpartum psychosis and having become delusional about our daughter's name. She claimed Neil was too stressed from work to recognize how serious the situation had become. She attached that photoshopped birth certificate as evidence that we were delusional. She presented it as proof that our daughter's real name was Elizabeth, and we'd been calling her Ruby due to my mental illness. She suggested the baby was in an unstable environment and needed family intervention before something terrible happened. Neil's phone was buzzing constantly with concerned relatives asking if we needed help. They wanted to know if we'd considered professional evaluation, if the baby was safe. Janet's email had been so detailed and official sounding that people were genuinely worried about our mental state and Ruby's well-being. But Janet had also called my workplace. My boss called that afternoon asking if everything was okay at home. Someone claiming to be a concerned family member had contacted HR, saying I was experiencing a mental health crisis and might be dangerous around vulnerable populations. Since I work with elderly clients in financial planning, HR had to take any safety concerns seriously. This was when I realized Janet had escalated from family manipulation to targeted harassment that could destroy my professional reputation and career. As someone who'd built my entire livelihood on trust and competence, having questions raised about my mental stability was potentially devastating. But Janet had made a crucial strategic error. She'd pitted her manipulation skills against someone who investigates fraud professionally and has access to legal resources she couldn't imagine. My network of attorneys, investigators, and documentation specialists was about to teach her why you don't mess with people who understand how the system actually works. I called Marcus Webb, a family law attorney my company had used for employee harassment cases. Marcus specialized in documenting systematic harassment and building restraining order petitions that judges couldn't ignore. When I explained Janet's behavior pattern over 5 months, Marcus said we had one of the strongest harassment cases he'd seen. We met at Marcus's downtown office and I presented my complete documentation file, screenshots of every fake name Janet had used with timestamps and witnesses, photos of the fraudulent Facebook page before it was removed, audio recordings of Janet refusing to use Ruby's legal name, copies of the mass email claiming we had mental health issues, records from the pediatrician's office about Janet's attempt to change medical records by impersonation. Marcus reviewed everything and said Janet's behavior clearly met legal definitions of harassment, identity fraud attempt, and defamation. Most importantly, her pattern of escalation indicated she'd continue until forced to stop by court intervention. Your mother-in-law has committed multiple crimes here, Marcus explained. Impersonating you to access medical records is identity fraud. Creating false social media accounts using your daughter's photos is unauthorized use of minor's image. Sending that mass email with false mental health claims is defamation. We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges if necessary. Marcus drafted a comprehensive cease and desist letter demanding Janet immediately stop using any name other than Ruby Mae Turner when referring to our daughter. It demanded she remove all remaining false social media content and cease all contact with our employers, medical providers, and extended family regarding our parenting decisions. The letter warned that continued harassment would result in restraining order proceedings and potential criminal charges. We sent the letter via certified mail, requiring Janet's signature for delivery. Within 3 hours of receiving it, Janet called Neil, crying hysterically. She said she couldn't believe her own son would threaten legal action over trying to help choose a better name for her granddaughter. Neil put her on speaker so I could record the conversation legally. Mom, this isn't about helping with a name choice. You tried to change Ruby's medical records by pretending to be my wife. You created fake social media accounts. You lied to our employers and family. You need to acknowledge Ruby's actual name and respect our boundaries. Janet's response eliminated any remaining doubt about her intentions. I will never call my granddaughter a stripper name, and you'll regret cutting me out when she grows up asking why she doesn't have a grandmother who loved her. That recorded refusal to comply with the cease and desist letter, combined with her explicit statement that she'd never use Ruby's legal name, gave us everything we needed for a restraining order petition. Marcus filed the paperwork immediately. 3 weeks later, we sat in family court with organized evidence folders containing 5 months of documented harassment. Janet arrived with her own attorney, dressed respectably and dabbing her eyes like she was the victim of our cruelty. The judge reviewed our evidence methodically. The fake Facebook page with hundreds of posts about a child named Elizabeth. The photoshopped birth certificate Janet had shared publicly. The group chat planning Christmas for a child with the wrong name. The recorded phone call where Janet explicitly refused to use Ruby's legal name. The mass email claiming we had mental health issues. When Janet's lawyer tried to argue this was just a family disagreement about name preferences, the judge cut him off mid-sentence. Attempting to change a child's medical records by impersonating a parent isn't expressing an opinion about names. It's identity fraud. Creating false online identities and spreading defamatory information goes far beyond having naming preferences. The judge granted a 1-year restraining order without hesitation. Janet couldn't contact us directly or indirectly, couldn't post anything about Ruby on social media, and had to stay 500 feet away from our home and workplaces. The judge said Janet's behavior showed an alarming inability to respect basic parental authority and boundaries. Janet stood up in court despite her lawyer trying to stop her and said we were keeping her from her only granddaughter over a simple name disagreement. The judge looked directly at her and said if she'd simply respected her granddaughter's legal name from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary. Her continued refusal to use Ruby's name, even in court, proved exactly why the restraining order was appropriate. Over the following months, several family members reached out to apologize for initially believing Janet's version of events. Once they understood she'd been systematically lying, creating fake identities, and attempting medical fraud, they realized they'd been manipulated by someone with serious boundary issues. Neil started therapy to process his relationship with his mother and learned that her controlling behavior wasn't new. It was just more visible now that she had a grandchild to focus on. He worked through complex feelings about protecting his daughter from his own mother's manipulation. We celebrated Ruby's first birthday with family members who'd proven they could consistently use her actual name and respect our parenting decisions. The gathering was smaller but built on genuine relationships rather than ones maintained through manipulation and lies. When the restraining order came up for renewal a year later, Janet's attorney contacted Marcus asking if we'd consider supervised visitation. Only if Janet completed family therapy and agreed to use Ruby's legal name. We were skeptical given everything that had happened, but we told Marcus we'd consider it only if Janet followed through with real therapeutic work, not just token sessions. 3 months later, Janet had enrolled in a therapy program specializing in family boundaries and controlling behaviors. Her therapist eventually reached out asking if we'd participate in a mediated conversation. Janet could take accountability for her actions as part of her healing process. After extensive discussion, we agreed to one supervised meeting at the therapist's office. Janet looked older and more tired than I remembered, but when she spoke, her words had a genuine quality they'd lacked before. She apologized for not respecting Ruby's name and for trying to control our parenting decisions. She admitted she'd been wrong to create the fake Facebook page, wrong to attempt changing medical records, wrong to lie to family about our mental health. Most importantly, she acknowledged that Ruby was a beautiful name with meaningful family history, honoring my grandmother who raised me. We agreed to supervise visits at a neutral location, a park where Janet could see Ruby for 1 hour every other week while Neil and I remained present. The first visit was awkward since Ruby had no memory of Janet, but Janet used Ruby's real name consistently for the entire hour and asked permission before taking any photos. Over 6 months of supervised visits, Janet slowly rebuilt trust. She brought gifts with Ruby's real name on them. She asked permission before posting any photos and respected our answer when we said no. She caught herself when she wanted to criticize our parenting choices and apologized for overstepping. When Ruby was almost 2 years old, we agreed to let Janet visit our home again. She brought a wooden sign that said Ruby's Room with painted letters and little gemstones around the border. She wanted to replace the Elizabeth's Nursery sign she'd hung during our hospital stay 2 years earlier. Neil actually cried when he saw it. This gesture acknowledged how wrong she'd been and showed she was trying to make it right. By Ruby's second birthday, we felt comfortable inviting Janet to the family party. She arrived early to help set up decorations that all had Ruby's name in big letters. When guests arrived, she introduced herself as Ruby's grandmother and told people proudly about how Ruby was named after her great-grandmother who'd raised me in Italy. The extended family situation remained complicated, with some relatives never fully forgiving Janet for the manipulation campaign that had made them all look foolish. But the relationships that survived the crisis came out stronger, built on people who'd proven they respected boundaries and stood by us when things got difficult. The whole experience brought Neil and me closer as a couple. Before Ruby was born, we'd avoid conflict over small disagreements. Now we'd survive something that tested everything about our partnership. Neil choosing our family over his mother's demands showed me our marriage could weather anything. Ruby grew into an amazing little person with no memory of the drama around her name. At 2 years old, she could say her name perfectly and would tell anyone who asked that she was Ruby, just like her great-grandma. She had friends who knew her as Ruby, teachers who wrote her name on artwork, a whole identity built on who she actually was. Sometimes I watch her playing and think about how close we came to letting Janet erase her identity before she was old enough to defend it herself. Ruby will grow up knowing her parents protected her from the start, that her name meant something important to us, that she was loved and valued exactly as she was. Looking back, I'm glad I documented those hospital conversations and built a comprehensive harassment case. Standing firm on boundaries cost us some family relationships, and the legal proceedings were expensive and stressful. But Ruby deserved parents who would protect her identity from day one. She deserved a family that respected who she was instead of trying to force her into someone else's vision. Sometimes protecting your child means fighting battles you never expected. It means telling family members no and sticking to it when they escalate. It means using professional resources and legal systems to enforce basic respect. But every time Ruby says her own name with pride, I know we made the right choice. Janet's therapeutic change didn't happen because we compromised or gave in to keep peace. It happened because we held firm boundaries and made her choose between her need for control and her relationship with her granddaughter. She finally chose Ruby, the real Ruby.